Hello, everyone, and it's great to have Dhruva with us. All of you know that we do run a podcast, or if you're new to Edbrand and the work we do, it'll be great to plug the fact that we do have a podcast and we interview interesting students, graduates, PhD scholars like Dhruva today. Um, not
I
to
think I think
intimidate.
the term is endless student. Yeah.
Exactly, this never-ending academician.
Yeah.
So just to make this really interesting, and I know the audience is mostly high school kids or parents of students who are really eager to know how it all works, how does one get into Harvard, but just to have a conversation around a topic which is sort of so contentious, the Ivy League and the whole pressure around getting into college can be can only add to anxiety in our lives. So, not to say that Dhruva's achievements are to be underplayed here, but we do want you to pose questions and feel free to interject at some time. Though it's a conversation that I want to share with the audience that I have, it'll be fun since it's a live event to have questions in the chat or even just raise your hand or just speak up.
Oh,
So,
I'm nervous now.
adding more pressure. So great. So Dhruva, I think the first set of questions typically I ask our alum, and but in this case, obviously we'd want to also know about your story since I'm not too familiar. Is growing up in Chennai, going to a public school, a CBSE school, a private CBSE school,
Yeah.
and then figuring out that you need to apply not to any other school but to Harvard University. And how did
Yeah.
it actually happen, that whole journey?
Yeah, so I went to the same school in Chennai from when I was in pre-KG, which is pre-kindergarten, when I had this napkin pinned onto my little uniform and I taught it into the school all the way through till 12th standard. So 15 years of my life in that same school. And it was a school called PS Senior Secondary School in Chennai. Very strong academically, but certainly not the kind of school that sent a lot of people abroad for undergrad. So, you had the IITs and the NITs and students who after that then went abroad for master's or PhD degrees. But in my class of 250 or so, I think only 4 or 5 of us ended up applying abroad for undergrad. So it definitely wasn't a common thing to do, and it wasn't the sort of environment in which there was a strong support system where you had guidance counselors who would tell you the kinds of activities you needed to do or help you out with the college applications in the way that I now realize there are lots of very, very strong schools across India that do have that. And so how I came across this idea was actually twofold. One was I was very indecisive as a high school student, and I think I still continue to be. And I found myself pulled in a lot of different directions. I was interested in economics, but also political science. I was interested in religion and culture and all of these different areas. And I really didn't want to make the decision about what I wanted to study before I went to university. And so I was reading up online, and I still remember in the ninth grade, I think I found this university called Brown, which has degrees, what's called a liberal arts system, where you could choose and try out different things for the first year before you land on what you want to study. And it blew my mind, and I decided that's something that I wanted to consider, but spoke about it with my family and wasn't sure if it was realistic. What then changed that trajectory and made it seem more real for me was that I got very into competitive debating. And so I debated for the Indian national team with the Indian Schools Debating Society for 3 years, competed at the World Championships in Scotland, in South Africa, and Turkey. And I still remember that when I went to Scotland for the first time that I was on the team, I ran into the national team from the UAE. And the national team from the UAE at that point was a team of Indian expats who had been living in the UAE and going to high school there. And what was cool about this team was that they were people who looked like me, spoke with similar accents, but after the competition ended in August, one of them was flying to NYU to start undergrad, one of them was going to Stanford, and one of them was going to Yale. And that blew my mind because that's the first time I think I'd met someone who had studied outside of the US but had gone to the US for undergrad. And that's when I first realized, okay, this might actually be something that I can do, because people like me, whose main extracurricular activity is debating, who went to Indian high schools, even if it was in the UAE, were doing it. And so I decided that I would give it a real shot. And so then worked on my applications in my senior year, and tried to figure out where I wanted to apply. The question of why Harvard is an interesting one. And I think, to be honest, it was driven by the fact that I knew I wanted to go to a good university, because I was doing well in school. I had strong extracurricular activities, but I also knew that I would not be able to afford to go without financial aid, and I would need full financial aid to be able to go. And as an international student, getting financial aid is incredibly hard, because most universities in the US take into account whether or not you need financial aid when making their decisions about accepting or rejecting you. And in my mind, I went, okay, so there are some universities that don't do that, that are truly need blind for international students, which means that when considering your application, they don't take into account whether or not you want financial aid. And so I applied to those. So those were Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Amherst at the time, and I think maybe Dartmouth as well. Then I thought, okay, let me just apply to some others where there are scholarships available. So Emory and Carleton University, Emory University in Atlanta and Carleton University in Minnesota both had debating scholarships specifically for students who've got achievements in the field. Then I was like, okay, the rest of the universities, which I think are most likely to give me a scholarship, are the wealthiest ones. And so I applied to the Ivies, so Dartmouth and Brown and all of those universities. To send all of those applications in, and at that point, I definitely wouldn't have said that Harvard was my top choice. I don't think I had a top choice. I was just waiting to see where the cards landed and then make a decision about where I wanted to go.
That's really interesting. And I think what I liked best was the fact that you were inspired by people who had made it and who seemed pretty much like you. They were from another country, but from India, Indian origin. Also, the fact that you found that niche, like you figured that debating is something you love, and at that point, these buzzwords of how to create a spike in your application, and how to package it or over package your extracurriculars and tell your story perhaps were not in your mind. I don't know how you work the whole college application process, but what do you think stood out at the schools that accepted you? What do you think
Yeah.
stood out?
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard the term spike, at least in this context before. And I don't think I heard it and knew about it until maybe my third year of undergrad, when I started talking to other folks who had applied from India. And I was like, wait, what? There's this whole world out there of admissions consultants and who are thinking about profile building and spikes and well-roundedness and all of that. And I was just like, I had gone through high school doing a bunch of things. And then when it came to essay season, I tried writing essays. I had some help from family in the US who put me in touch with others who'd applied recently. So I got a couple of people to look through my essays, but otherwise was just trying to think through how do I tell the story as convincingly as possible, and went through the process pretty independently. So I think the question of what stood out in my application is a really hard one for me to answer, because to cut to the chase, I got into, of all those universities that I'd applied to, I got into Harvard, Amherst, and Emory, but I got rejected from every single other university. So the question of, why did I not get into a Carleton or a Cornell, but get into Harvard, is one that comes down to probably my Harvard admissions officer had lunch that day that he had enjoyed and decided that he was in a good mood and let me in. So I do think a lot of it comes down to luck and a lot of it comes down to chance. But what in my application got me considered and not rejected in the first place, because they probably only are even seriously considering a handful of the applications, is a different question. I can walk you through what I think did that. So I'd say I had a pretty well-rounded application when I was applying. I had very strong grades, sort of A's, or in the CBSE system, 95 above grades throughout. I was head boy of the school, so I think that was a pretty significant leadership / social commitment chunk of it. I had my debating, so I'd been on the team for 3 years and we'd done pretty well. And the other big international thing that I had was that I had been pretty obsessively learning German now for a few years. So I did a summer program at the Goethe Institute in Chennai when I was in the 8th grade, and nerdy 13-year-old me was like, this is so fun. And I spent all day, every day learning German in the 8th grade, and I stuck with it through high school. And as a result of doing that, I got two opportunities. Once when I was in the 10th grade to go on a fully funded language learning trip to Germany, which was one of these international exchange type programs. And then when I was in the 11th grade, I got to represent India at the International German Olympiad, which is a much nerdier version of the International Math or Physics Olympiad, where they test you on your German skills, and you've got to do like a play, and you've got to write a poem and do all of these things. And I ended up winning a bronze medal for India in my division there. So that was my other big international achievement alongside debating. So I had both of those. I had my academics, I had head boy, and then I had like a smattering of other things that many high school students have. So some theater, some quizzing, some those sorts of things at the city level.
So do you
And
remember what
so
you wrote in your personal essay to most colleges?
I do remember my Common App essay, and looking back, I definitely would not write the same essay. So I just wrote a very traditional sort of essay about why I like debating, and how it challenged my opinions and views, and got me to think in a wider way. And looking back now, you know, anyone who did debating could have written that essay, and I really don't think that it was my strongest piece of writing. And in fact, I think the supplemental essay that I wrote for Harvard, which was this sort of piece where I compared the characteristics that India, the country had, with the characteristics I had, and how I saw myself reflected in the country, I think was a far stronger piece of writing. And I wish I'd done something a bit more creative with the Common App, but worked out, I guess.
Then when you got there, the whole idea of a student coming in from India, Chennai, CBSE school, then finally sort of setting foot in Massachusetts and Boston and Cambridge. So how does it really sink in? What were your first few weeks at Harvard like? And what were you thinking in terms of the academic preparation that you need to do?
Yeah, it was odd because for whatever reason, I took to Harvard and Boston very, very quickly. I didn't really have any sort of transition shocks, or didn't wasn't homesick. In fact, I sometimes look back on my Facebook Messenger conversations with my mom, where there'd be situations where she would send me messages day after day going, hey, how are you doing? And by day 3, it'd be like, please, are you alive or dead? And I just would not have responded to any of these because I was so busy with my schoolwork and clubs and meeting new people that I wasn't even thinking about folks back home. And now looking back on it, I was like, I was an awful child, but I think it's pretty common for college freshmen to do that. So I think the transition was pretty smooth because I think we're all very Americanized. So I was pretty used to the culture. I was very extroverted and personable. So I loved getting to know all of these people and meeting all of them. And academically, even though I wasn't prepared because of school, given that CBSE doesn't really expect you to write papers or read academic papers or any of that. So for example, I'd never done research before, and you're expected to read academic papers from day one at university. I found that my debating experience helped me quite a bit with just knowing how to structure my thoughts and knowing how to put forth a point of view. And I found that what CBSE did do was that it prepared you to work really, really hard, even if it comes at the cost of your social life, which probably not a great thing for a 17-year-old, but I knew that when I had a math test, I would just spend hours working out all of the problems in the textbook until I was ready to take the test. So I think those two helped quite a lot with the academic side of things, so I definitely could have been better prepared.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that perhaps there were gaps in the way you looked at academics back in school, and you were expected from day one to read academic papers and journals and sort of annotate, analyze, and sort of present your views. How is it that finally, looking back now, since you're running Lumiere Education with your co-director, such a fantastic sort of opportunity for high school kids to be a part of, and I know students personally who've benefited from the mentorship at Lumiere. So was that something that played in your mind over the years, and that's how Lumiere was born? And uh, what exactly prompted you to improve on your academic writing skills and research skills, and then how did this idea of Lumiere come about?
Yeah, so Lumiere was interesting. So I finished undergrad, then went into my master's and my PhD at Oxford, and was just surrounded by research all around me. And I'd also continued working with young students from around India with as the coach of the Indian debating team, which I then transitioned to when I was at university. And so when I was just sort of bringing these experiences together and speaking with my friend Stephen, Stephen and I were classmates at Harvard, and we'd actually met in a research program, and we were sort of talking about this and what we'd been up to, and all of a sudden we came across this idea that seemed, as soon as we said it, it made so much sense, which was here were these amazing opportunities that we'd got because of research. It pushed us to think harder. It pushed us to learn more about the world, to think about how to make the world a better place. It pushed us to find community with each other as well as with our mentors. We were sort of like, well, why didn't we have that earlier? Why couldn't that have come when we were in high school in a way that would have expanded our horizons and prepared us a lot better for university? And so I think that's where the genesis of Lumiere came from. And then we kicked it off, and there was just immediate interest, because I think there is such a hunger among students all across the world for access to high quality research opportunities and mentorship that's currently just not being met by universities or schools. And so we have had over 500 students from 26 different countries do the program so far, and it's been amazing to see just sort of the students, whether they're exploring genetics and machine learning for the first time, or art history and classics, the kind of growth that you can get over 12 weeks of working with someone who's doing a PhD at a top research university. So that's where it came from, and it's been a really, really fulfilling journey, and one that I hope will continue to take us to many, many students and schools across the world.
So going back to your experience at Harvard and then eventually going on to study at Oxford and even currently pursuing the DPhil program there, how did you choose that economics, international development? These are the areas that would interest you the most. Were there along the way mentors who sort of
Um,
planted that seed or kind of inspired to do more? And eventually, when you look back now, what are the future opportunities that you thought would be available to students who walk this path? So career sort of tracks and trajectories for kids who want to do economics, international development, not necessarily
yeah.
join Wall Street.
Yeah. So I think I knew that I was interested in studying how society functioned and how social institutions function. But whether that would be from the point of view of economics or political science or law or religion, I wasn't entirely sure about. And so I took the time at university, and that was one of the benefits of going to a place like Harvard, which has got fantastic faculty, where I was doing economics with Greg Mankiw, who literally wrote the textbook. I was studying religion with Diana Eck, who's one of the foremost authorities on Hinduism, studying political science with incredible professors, such that I think I got an exposure to all of these topics in my first year. And I realized that what I really enjoyed about economics was the fact that it used quantitative methods and statistics and data to answer the questions that it took up. And I found that really fascinating. And I found that to be a much more exact way of answering questions than some of the other fields, which were using more sort of qualitative methods and methods that seemed at the time to me a little bit more sort of open to bias or interpretation. I feel differently now, so I've changed my mind a little bit on that. But at that point, that's how I was thinking, and I dove deep into economics research, and I loved particularly development economics, so studying how countries like India could do better by its populations, increase its GDP, improve its education and healthcare. Those sorts of questions were the ones that I found the most interesting when in undergrad, and those were the ones I spent most of my time pursuing. And when I was in undergrad, I was keeping my options open about what I wanted to do. I think the I knew that I wanted to be doing something that I felt was impact oriented. So the idea of working for a tire manufacturer and thinking about how to increase their profit margins by 5% was just something that the idea of doing that grossed me out and still grosses me out a little bit. So I did want to do something that I felt had real social impact. And so whether that would be through a PhD and research, whether that would be through international institutions or nonprofits, or whether that would be through impact-oriented private sector work, I think I was open to considering all of these options, and got a long career ahead of me, and I might end up doing multiple of those in the decades to come. But the underlying principles of impact-oriented work remain the same. I think I've just narrowed down the areas that I'm most interested in right now as the sort of education to employment pipeline, where we think about how do we ensure that students are ready for the workforce, how do we ensure that jobs exist for them, and that they can then find and access those jobs. And it's sort of those set of topics that excite me the most currently.
Fascinating for India to have scholars like you to discussing and sort of researching this. Um, I think the question that I had perhaps not discussed with many students is when they choose grad school, like you did in another country, like you go to undergrad in one country and then choose to go to grad school in the UK in your case. What was that decision like for you, one? And secondly, what are the differences you see since you're not an undergrad there? What do you see are even vicariously through people who've done undergrad in the UK at Oxford, say? What do you think is the difference between a US degree and a UK undergrad?
Yeah. So I think the UK is excellent if you know exactly what you want to do and you want to go deep into it. And especially if you're wanting to keep open the option of returning to India and working here. So the students for whom I think the UK is a really good fit are if you want to do law or medicine in particular, because you can do that straight in undergrad, and then you're qualified at the end of it, and you have the ability to come back to India and continue working as well. The other thing that I found about the UK is that it is very independent. So I found that the US academic process handholds you a lot more than the UK does. And the UK, you're sort of, or at least at Oxford, you're given a reading list at the beginning, and then sort of on you to find these books and read them, and then meet with your tutor once a week and have an essay ready that you discuss, and then your tutor gives you some feedback and you move on. But in the US, you have a GPA system where every single thing you do contributes to the GPA. You've got, you know that the upcoming pop quiz is worth 5% of your grade. You know what the final essay is. You know where to go if you need help and resources. And I think, at least for me, I found that system to be really valuable, because I think I'd have found the fully independent system to be a little bit disorienting. The other big difference that I think also is salient is that most US undergrads, almost all US undergrads are 4 years long, whereas most UK undergrads are 3 years long. And I think from my perspective, I really like the fact that you have an additional year in the US where you get to build stronger relationships with your students and your professors. You get to explore more because the liberal arts system allows for that. And you also get an extra summer where you can do one more internship or another work ex to see what it is that you want to do after graduating. So all of those make me feel like if I had to do it again, I would definitely pick the US and have it all over again. But I can see the benefits of both.
Sure, we've talked about academics and your journey, and then you briefly mentioned how your interest in debating continued, and perhaps even as a head coach for the Indian national team. How does that designation even come about? Like, what do you have to do, and what does it entail?
Yeah, so this is there's this organization that I'd recommend that you all look up called the Indian Schools Debating Society, and they're the sort of nonprofit that's in charge of selecting and training the national team of high school students that goes to the World Schools Debating Championships, which is sort of like the Olympics of debating. And so I had been lucky enough to be on the team when I was in high school, and so when they were looking for coaches for the national team in 2016, they sent the word out, and it arrived on in my inbox, and then I spoke to them, and they brought me on as a coach. At that point, I was working sort of in assistance to another coach who was more experienced. But as time went on, I coached the team from 2016 to 2020, and in that period, I eventually became one of the head coaches, and in 2019, it was incredible. It was the first time ever that India won the World Championships. So we managed to take India all the way to the finals, where they debated Canada, and then eventually won. And the individual speaker who was ranked the top speaker in the world that year was also from India. So it was a truly incredible experience, and I'd definitely encourage you to check out the Indian Schools Debating Society. I think selections for the national team for the upcoming year have actually just started, so it's definitely worth checking out.
That's great. Many of our students who attend college fair and work with me closely on applications have interest in rhetoric debate. It'd be great to pass this information forward. Thanks. So the other thing about Lumiere, which I really liked about your organization, was the newsletters you sent out, and the stuff that I got in my inbox today was interesting. Some of the talent search or challenges, and Stockholm Junior Water Prize is something that came up, and the Hack Wizard and virtual hackathons and all of that. So what do you think of these interesting opportunities? And students have a busy life in high school. Is it uh, is it so important to participate in competition, something that stands you sort of apart from the rest of the audience, even if it's a participation? Or do you think just reaching a sort of level which is really commendable will make you?
Yeah, I'm glad you like the Lumiere newsletters. Stephen and I have a lot of fun writing them. And so for those of you who aren't aware, this is basically a newsletter that either Stephen or I write on a monthly basis. And it's usually sent out to just the members of the Lumiere community. So students, alumni, parents, and partners. But if you're interested, please drop me a line, and I'm sure we could get you on there as well. And so what we do at the end of each of those newsletters, in addition to just sort of a reflection about the program and how it's going, and reflections on research, is we also have a couple of opportunities at the end that we've come across over the course of the month that we think would be useful for high school students. And so in terms of why we do that, I think it's because I do think that these competitions and programs can be really valuable. And that's because if you're applying to a college in the US or the UK, unless you're from a really prominent high school, unless you're from the Dune schools of the world, they have very little conception of what the quality of your high school is, what the academic ability of students in your class are, what the fact that you got a 98 versus a 95% mean. And so having some sort of independent markers that say, actually, there are these other organizations or these other metrics by which I stack up against the top students globally can be really, really valuable. And I think that's where these competitions come in terms of the application, is it gets you to say, look, here's something that shows that I am cut out for an academic career at your college. The other thing it does from the applications perspective is it also signals interest in particular fields or areas. So you get to say, hey, I am really interested in the environment because I competed at the Stockholm Water Prize, or I'm really interested in writing because I applied to this essay contest, which can be a signal that goes beyond what you just say in your application. And finally, it also gets you to explore things that you may not have explored before, and develop skills that you haven't before. And so I think all of those are reasons why competitions or independent research projects are all really valuable for similar reasons, which is those.
Great. So, I think what I liked most was the explore part. And I think that's something so important. Even if you have a limited sort of time in your calendar, unless you explore new things, it's hard to know you'll be good at it. And even if you are not good at it, you meet new people and figure out friendships that might last a lifetime. So great, fantastic. So I think we've run out of our first leg, which is getting to know your journey and everything else. And the second half is more to do with questions from the audience. I'm going to stop recording, so make it more interesting for you to just feel free and ask whatever you want. Both of us can answer questions on admissions, but we'll be more happy if you share some more information about you before asking. And then if you want to type your responses or questions in the chat feature, please do that. Just to also let everyone know, we do several events, and many of you are in our database for the collegefair.live fairs that we conduct. Our next fair is on August 28th. It's coming up soon. Typically, we have fairs in the evening in India time. So if you're in a different time zone, you can always connect and do our air meet sort of platform, and you'll probably be prompted with the right time zone. So look forward to seeing you all. And so feel free to ask questions right now, and looking forward to continuing this conversation with Dhruva.